Welcome to Connect with Adult Ed. I am Nadia Cater, your host. We are recording in spring, right? After a Judeo Christian doubleheader, which was Passover and Easter hitting at the same time.
Mhm.
Doesn't always happen. So when it does, it's a little special for people who celebrate. I forgot to celebrate anything, so that wasn't me. But I hope that by the time this gets out to people, probably gonna forget this time ever happened. So, but it's been warm, it's been breezy. I hope that people who do tune in are coming at it with okay, good vibes, good weather, ready to take on anything like we are today. So, of course, frequently I'm joined by my co-host Jamie Trujillo.
Mhm.
Welcome,
Hello, hello.
Jamie.
Hi.
Yeah. And we have a very special guest today, who is Patty McGee. So, Patty, I usually like guests to introduce themselves. I never said this before, but I was thinking about it, and I was like, the reason why I like guests to introduce themselves because they'll do a better job than I can. So, please introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Patty McGee, like you said, and that's one of those names that immediately sticks like it's all one name. People call me Patty McGee as if that's my first name. And I am a traveling teacher, which as a second grader described me to her grandpa. That lady's not a stranger. She's a traveling teacher. She comes to schools to make teachers' jobs just a little bit easier, and sometimes she teaches us. That's what I do. I've written a few books. I've been in education for over 3 decades, and I just endlessly trying to promote delightful literacy practices for all ages.
I gotta say, for a second grader, that is really astute.
Right?
Yeah, I think we vastly underestimate children's understanding of the world, but I think children can explain things better than some of us
Mhm.
adults
I
can.
agree.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's wonderful. So you refer to yourself as a traveling teacher,
Yes.
not a consultant. Can you tell me before we jump in, because I know I'm already jumping in, but it's exactly what we talked about before Jamie hit the record button of like, oh, maybe other questions might come up. And this is exactly it.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. I think that the word consultant sounds very clinical and not very specific to education. Also, professional development experiences vary in their quality. And I feel like I'm a stronger quote unquote consultant because I still am working with students as part of the professional learning experience. And it also keeps me happy. I just love to be in the classroom, and I am constantly surprised, and I don't know, it often makes me giggle the things that come out of any age student. And because I'm not expecting it, it just adds that extra bit of whimsy to a job that's really hard, meaning like the teaching profession is just one of the most challenging and just becomes more and more so. So when I get to be in classrooms with kids and with teachers, and we find these little gems, whatever they might be, we find a lot more satisfaction in the work that we do. And so if I just said I was a consultant, it sounds very distant from the classroom. And while I don't have my own classroom any longer, I really still feel connected to the classroom.
I really love that. And it seems to me like you come into this with these multiple perspectives, as in teaching children and teaching adults, in that, providing professional development to instructors. That means, of course, that you're dealing with adult learners.
Yeah.
And, as you know, we are in adult education. And so at least for me personally, I don't teach kids, never formally taught kids, always taught adults. And so that's, to me, very interesting going from that dynamic of working with. And I think that in a little bit, when I ask this question, you'll talk more about this, but, either exclusively teaching second graders or maybe other grades, and then teaching the teachers,
Mhm.
providing that PD to the teachers. I love that expansion of that audience. And so, I think that that leads me into the first question about, let's go a little bit deeper. What is, your experience overall with teaching, and how did you decide to become a traveling teacher?
Well, gosh, I've been in education for 3 decades, and I started teaching in the school that I went to. So I already had my heroes around me. My first grade teacher was now my principal. And so she taught me how to read, and she also taught me how to teach. And I just have never been an educator that is comfortable staying in one place for too long. It's like every 5 to 8 years, I find myself curious or drawn to other things. So when my kids were young, I was drawn to the library, and I got my library media certification and thought of myself as a little bit of a dealer, but of books. And I then became an instructional coach in the same school. And then as soon as I just started deeply learning about all different subject areas and all different age groups and the way people learn and what we put into place and how that can make a difference, I was just drawn to sharing that. I consider myself a bit of a pollinator in education, where I have the privilege of working with teachers in, say, one school district, and then flying to a different state, to a different school district, and sharing all the things I've learned from all the teachers previously, and the teachers that I'd be presently working with. I probably would never have met the others, but I get to bring and plant the seed of many of the things that I've learned from others. So I can't say exactly definitively when there was a moment that I said I'm going to be a traveling teacher, but I do have to acknowledge just my curiosity in all things teaching and learning. And I guess that's what brought me here.
So it almost sounds like that was just a natural progression. This is the next thing. And, considering what you were saying about being kind of restless, wanting to try new things and do new things. Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like that was just naturally what you were going to end up doing.
Yes. Much to this
Mhm.
dismay of my father. He just thought it was so silly to do anything but be where I was in the 4th grade classroom in the school that I went to. Not that he wasn't proud. I think after he saw that this something like this can work out, he felt better about it, but boy, did I get an earful.
I think
Yeah.
it also speaks to, like, that different mindset, or the
Mm,
generational mindset of, you work and you do this job for this many years and then you retire, and that's what you do, and you're
mhm,
not supposed to deviate from that. You're not
yes,
supposed to try all these different things. That's kinda how I was raised too.
mhm,
Just do this thing until you retire, and I think that we've seen, especially increasingly as the years have gone by,
mhm,
that doesn't have to be the case, and sometimes shouldn't be the
right,
case.
right,
It's not always a safer bet.
right, exactly.
So, the next question then is, why grammar specifically?
Ah, grammar specifically, it was like the final frontier. It was dismal when I was teaching it because I was using the same methodology that was always being used of worksheets and fill in the blanks in those worksheets and memorization and identification. And it's not to say those things aren't things we do with grammar now, but when it's the only thing that we do with grammar, and then I don't know who came up with this, but there is an unsaid expectation that the second you do a worksheet on some type of skill, there's immediate application of that skill. And that just isn't realistic in any type of learning. And I had to do something about it. It was a problem of practice, and it took me longer than other problems that I had to really come to the point where I felt like I found something that is the antidote to that traditional approach. The traditional approach did work for some people. It didn't work for the majority of us. And I know this because I can see it in, all things social media. I didn't feel like I learned it well myself. And as I talked to other educators, we really didn't. I'm not alone in that feeling. And because of that, and because grammar isn't just a linear set of static rules, it's living and breathing and ever evolving. And when I started to realize that, and I started to think about what are instructional practices that can allow entry points for grammar learning that have been missing. And I met my co author who just knows more about grammar than I'll ever dream to know. And it was just the perfect combination there. So it was a problem of practice that I was, I guess, in the back of my mind, kind of searching for answers. And now that I've seen the results from the past, say, 6 years of teachers taking on some of the work that I've co created with them and with Tim Donahue, my co author, it's just absolutely wonderful. Like there's conversation, there's laughter, there's curiosity, there's gosh, playfulness. Like it's amazing to witness when we see people engaging, and I say people because I'm teaching grammar to grown-ups as well, because a lot of us have not held on to, including me. I needed Tim to teach me these things so that I could hold on to them as well. But it's irresistible now.
One thing that is interesting to me that you brought up is going back to your original statement about how, for some reason, there was this idea that once you completed this worksheet or you passed this test or you
Mhm.
did that thing, that automatically you can apply it to life and then that's just it. You're done, you
Right,
can move forward.
right.
And if that were the case, then we wouldn't have to so deeply go into grammar as adult education instructors
Mhm,
because we teach students who have done exactly what you were talking about,
mhm.
filling out all those worksheets, taking all those tests. It doesn't stick. You
No.
know, when we think about the levels of learning,
Mhm.
memorization and recall is the lowest level of learning. It doesn't stick.
Yeah,
And it also makes me think about ESL instruction. Because
yeah.
again, I'm coming to this as an adult educator, right? I have never personally taught ESL, but the more I learn about ESL
Mhm,
instruction, the more I realize that it is mostly about those conversations.
mhm,
And like you said, there's life that is
mhm.
brought into it. And it's so wonderful to see that. And so I think that goes very well into the next question because you already talked about it. You've seen what does not work,
Yeah.
right? So going on to what does work, what is your approach to grammar, curriculum, and writing instruction?
My approach begins with a mindset shift that grammar is to a writer as a paintbrush is to a painter. That we think of grammar as the way we style and craft our writing on the page to make meaning for our audience. And when we think of grammar with a much more expansive definition than we're mostly used to, we start to see the possibilities of what grammar learning can do. So it begins with that. And then it also creates multiple entry points to learning grammatical concepts across time and knowing that mastery isn't something that is necessarily going to happen because, well, first of all, even the most grammatical of places, let's say like APA style, that gets updated every few years. And then there's all different style guides that have differing quote unquote rules. So mastery isn't a real thing when it comes to grammar. So those mind shifts then can lead into kind of where my mind went when I was really thinking to myself, well, if this approach to grammar isn't working, what works when we're learning something? Like, what, I don't know, places do we naturally put ourselves in when we're learning something new? And so I love to refinish furniture with special chalk paints and waxes. And when I learn how to do that, I first get curious about like, ooh, what color combo and wax combination might look good on this piece of furniture. And then I hypothesize like what I think would be best. And then I seek out feedback from somebody more expert who usually then demonstrates in a step by step way that I can use the paints to align with my vision. And before I paint the furniture, I experiment with it in a number of different kind of trials on scrap wood or on cardboard, and maybe even a little corner of the piece of furniture, just to be able to give myself the chance to practice. And then I go for it. And at the end, I look and I think, what could I glean from this? What do I want to remember? And what is it that I can do differently the next time? And what am I curious about? And so when we have those same entry points for grammar instruction and more, we end up giving ourselves the space and time to learn grammar and build grammar know how. And we also take a lot of the shame off of the instruction. Grammar instruction is sadly rooted in practices that make those who don't know grammar very uncomfortable, whether it's through the correction approach or grammar games, even where there's a winner and a loser. That just, and, people walking around with mugs that say, I'm silently correcting your grammar, or t shirts that say grammar police. There's this undercurrent of, I'm better off than you are because I know grammar so well. And when we create an ecosystem where grammar is studied rather than, I don't know, punished or gifted to some and not to others, it creates an entirely different experience. And learning happens.
I can't say that I've ever really looked at grammar as something that is to be approached creatively and with curiosity.
Mm,
And I really appreciate that approach to that kind of mindset.
mm,
When I did teach language arts and grammar, I do not teach in the classroom anymore, but when I did, I did have to go through those lessons, and
mhm.
it was often, these are the grammar rules.
Yeah.
It's very black and white. Like you
Mhm,
said, right or wrong.
mhm.
And that doesn't leave any space for risk taking
Yeah.
or just trying things out. And I think the more that anyone opens their mind to it and realizes that there's so many differences in stylistically looking at grammar, that
Mhm,
two very different things can be grammatically correct,
mhm,
but one person will swear by one and the other person will
mhm.
swear by the other. It doesn't make either one of them wrong or right. It
Yeah.
just is a difference in style, which I think can make even any language learning very frustrating and difficult.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that approach that kind of in any way will take away that frustration and
Mm.
make it about creativity and curiosity. I think that's gonna stick with me from today forward. I love that.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And so with that, I'm gonna stop talking and I'm gonna hand it over to Nadia to continue with the questions.
Thank you, Jamie.
Mhm.
Yeah, Patty, you did touch upon this in a few different ways. More, I guess, more specifically, what is one aspect of grammar instruction that people don't typically know about?
Well, it could be my favorite, and that is grammar manipulatives. That is taking different, very simple tools like, I don't know, sentence strips and or individualized words, cut them out, be able to move them around and have conversations with a partner or in a small group about any decisions we'd be making with these manipulatives. So just by way of example, so that listeners can picture this, one of my favorites is something that we call sentences from a sentence. So that would be where we would find a sentence or two or three that we just really like. And we type them up on a document and we enlarge the font and we cut out each word and each piece of punctuation. And then grammar learners get together in partners. This is really important that it's not solo, that they're in partners or trios, and they are making as many sentences as they can, reusing the words and the punctuation as many times as they'd like to and say a certain amount of time. And that type of collaboration and deliberation teaches a whole lot. One, we're hearing standard grammar because standard grammar is the type of grammar we use when we want to write more professionally or academically. We hear spoken grammar all the time. Ideally, we're hearing or reading book grammar, but standard grammar is kind of where we start because it's the most underworked with type of grammar. And then the grammar learners make as many sentences as they can. They're not trying to recreate the original sentences. This just gives us enough words to be able to do this. And sometimes I'll get questions like, well, can I take the S off the end of this word? Because then it'll make the sentence work. And I love saying, not the rules for this are you can't, because then they're talking like agreement, let's say. So there's so many things that happen about what works and what doesn't. And then after, say, 10 minutes of it, or even less, ask those small groups of grammar learners to connect with each other. And instead of the first thing they think is going to happen is they're going to count to see who has the most. But then there's a winner or a loser, and I don't want that in my grammar instruction. Instead, they get together and they admire each other's sentences. And if that's hard, I give a couple of sentence stems to get it started. In this sentence, you, something that sounds beautiful is this part I admire so much because it's cracking me up. Just as a way of looking at other grammar experiences, creations with an admiring eye. So that's one example of a grammar manipulative. And there's many more. And it's just so low risk, high return.
Yeah, it's kind of back to what you were saying earlier about worksheets. You can't really engage or collaborate or reflect on each other's work. It's harder to do that with the structure, but that's kind of we're still kind of taught those structures at times and we lean on them. So that's a really fascinating approach and very doable. I think just from your example, it's any instructor can just write a bunch of words on papers and just have their students do this activity. So
Yes.
it's really accessible and very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah. So again, as naturally happens with these kind of interviews and conversations, we kind of touch on aspects of future questions. But I still like to dive deep, especially if we didn't fully capture the answer. So in my anecdotal experience, I've been corrected on how to write or say things, correctly or the right way. And it has really colored my viewpoint on how grammar is used because that's kind of my experience of being corrected. And of course, when I was teaching, there was that also that again that stigma of being correct or making sure I'm right, and that does have an effect on learners.
Mhm.
So, is it possible to reduce this stigma of saying or writing something incorrectly and have a better relationship with grammar? And what might that look like in the classroom?
Yes. 100%. and 1,000 different ways. I'm just going to name a few. So, first, if we're taking part in studying grammar and we're not actually composing yet on our own, those manipulatives, I like to create challenges or provocations. So let's say there's one of those sentences that they wrote down that's not actually a sentence. So I might say something like, this is almost a sentence. There's just two more things you need. See if you can find it. So there isn't correction per se. It's not like I'm ignoring that it's not a complete sentence. It's just that I'm there to nudge to see if we can figure it out. And then if I do say, okay, well, in this particular almost sentence, you would need this. If that's the thing, I'll ask them to recreate a sentence, making sure that that part, say, like part of speech is there. So it's a little more practice. It's not a tone of, I know I keep coming back to shame or embarrassment. It's really how we approach that sort of experience as someone who wants to uplift and create experiences that will start to chip away at the feeling of that we get when our grammar is corrected to oblivion. When it comes to grammar, while a person is writing and I want to give them feedback, first of all, before anything is, say, turned over to me, or before I might sit side by side with a writer and give feedback, I'll ask them to do a quick 2 to 3 minute, or I'll do this daily, a 2 to 3 minute edit. Because when you think about writing, it's a lot like being a conductor of an orchestra. You need to know every instrument. You need to know the song. You need to know which instrument is coming in and when they're overlapping, and when there's one instrument that either has a solo or is prominent in the piece. And to conduct writing like that is very difficult and also incredibly unrealistic. We will not get our best piece of writing if we do not have a process. Yes, there's test writing where we have to be much quicker about it, but that's not every type of writing out there. It is high stakes writing. And so I do think that will teach people how to answer quickly, but also if we're going to be better at those moments, we need to have the opportunity to slow down and learn how to use what we're using. So that's like step one, a 3 minute edit every day or before I give feedback. Two, I loved watching my father learned how to crochet from my Aunt Helen. And then I took this as like her methods as my methods in feedback and writing. So my dad decided that he was going to learn how to crochet. I think I was in my teens at the time. And my Aunt Helen is a master crocheter, and she would come and sit side by side with him. She'd bring her own crocheting tools, and she would ask my father, what are you working on? Or tell me about your blanket, because his only genre was blanket, no scarf, no glove, just blanket. And then he would usually say something self-deprecating, like, it's got so many holes, it's like a wedge of Swiss cheese. But my aunt would always respond with, but look at this part here, the strong part. You must have counted your stitches there. So number one, Aunt Helen started with a strength. And it wasn't fluffy. It wasn't like, oh, but here it's great and there it's great. It's like, here we're counting your stitching or your stitches. Keep counting. So when we're looking at our own writing and we're so afraid of the correction that we're going to get, when we hear what's strong, we'll continue doing that. So that is the type of feedback we can give. If we want to go further, my Aunt Helen would say, well, because you were counting your stitches here, I can show you how you can use that kind of counting to fill some holes. So we're not ignoring the things that we want or a writer would want improved ourselves or the person doing the writing. But instead, we're starting with a strength and then we're saying, and here's the next step for you. Here's an opportunity. And then instead of me fixing it or putting my corrections on their writing, like my Aunt Helen wouldn't take the blanket and start fixing the holes for him. She would take her own materials and show a step by step in how to say fix a hole or a step by step in how to do an edging, whatever it might be. She picked one thing, and it wasn't one thing to do once. It was one thing that was going to be needed a lot throughout the blanket making experience. And so she modeled it, and then my dad would try it. And as he was trying it, she was coaching him. Okay, try it this way. Oop, wait, that's a little too tight. Now it sounds like a very long and drawn out experience, but it's really not. It's picking one thing, it's naming a strength, and it's sharing a next step. And what Aunt Helen was thinking just naturally, and she wasn't a teacher, like a school teacher, she was a good teacher of crocheting because she would think of my father and say, what's the one thing that's going to help Peter become a stronger crocheter? That's the thing I'm going to teach him today. Not how can I make sure this is a perfect blanket. And so that kind of approach to grammar feedback, it is not correction, but it's also not ignoring the things that can be elevated. So it's starting with a strength, sharing a next step.
Thank you for that anecdote. It sounds like your aunt not only was a content matter expert, but she was also really proficient in teaching and understanding the learner,
Yeah.
which are really, really important aspects of teaching that sometimes can be really hard to like quantify,
Yeah.
you know, but it's absolutely necessary for the process.
Mhm.
And yeah, and I really I do appreciate that approach to feedback because I also think that's something that can be missing at times, especially in professional development, of how to give feedback. And feedback is a strategy. There needs to be
Yes.
strategy. So I really appreciate that, and that gives us some like kind of insight into
Mhm.
your approach. I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And finally, you have been on many podcasts, like I saw on your website. I didn't have time to go through all of them, but,
No, who does?
yeah, but it made me think of just you've been on so many podcasts talking about the work you do, and what's one question that you out of all those experiences you haven't been asked and that you'd like to be asked,
Mhm.
and how would you answer it? So in a way, it's kinda like we're asking you to do the work for us.
Okay. Oh, okay. So I think a question that I haven't been asked that I would love to chat about is how we code switch from one piece of writing to the next. Grammar is a tool for that. I think I've like tried to tuck it into certain podcasts, but we write for different audiences. Most people have gone through school and you're working with adults. So, adults think of writing as simply writing so they pass some type of test. And that writing is not only that, but it was often here's a prompt, finish it in a short amount of time. But that just isn't the way we grow and develop our voice on the page. The way we do that is we try all different types of writing for all different audiences, not just test graders. And we look at the grammar that we know and that we've studied, and then we use or misuse grammar intentionally for our audience. So if I'm writing something where this happened, trying to convince my high school son when he was in high school, trying to convince the Latin teacher to spend some time working with my son because he was not doing very well. And it was a different type of audience. So I was very clear with my grammar. I was very on point with my grammar. I was very formal and respectful. There was no playfulness with this audience. This was firm yet respectful with an adherence to grammatically what people would call grammatically correct grammar. Whereas I tell stories to my friends, I might have a life of a collection of the most number of embarrassing stories of any human being in my life. And they love to hear them because they're funny, because it's like, how could this happen? My one college roommate is like, gotten to the point where she's like, of course that happened to you. So when I write some of these down, first of all, I've rehearsed them like crazy, but I'm writing for my friends because that's a completely different grammar that I'm using. It's something more conversational. If I'm looking to convince somebody to do something, I think of like, who am I convincing? What do they value? What's their position? Do they value a more conversational, kind of lighthearted tone, or do they value something very strongly written? All of this gets us things, gets us laughter, gets us what we're looking for, helps us teach people, it helps us pass tests. It creates an entirely different trajectory in our life if we have these tools in our hands and we can use them to code switch from audience to audience. And whatever trajectory we'd like to take, there's a greater chance we're going in that direction when we have that flexibility.
Fantastic. Absolutely. The themes I keep pulling from your responses are strategy and really critically choosing the right tools, right? And that's very applicable to so many different subjects, even beyond writing. And I really appreciate just bringing that back because listening to your experiences and just what you've been telling us, it makes me reflect on being a teacher. And I don't think I've really had PD specifically for writing and grammar that did focus on strategy in that way. I think like the biggest focus is and of course there was limitations of where I was at of just the focus was better understanding content,
Mhm.
which knowing content is so important, but where we are kind of missing that. And I think I've also taken for granted of just being a native English speaker and went through formal systems of education
Mhm.
that writing wasn't as pertinent in my PD search as it was, for example,
Mhm.
like math.
Yeah.
And that's really limiting. And I definitely I felt limited and I limited myself
Mhm.
because of that. So it's fascinating to really think about this because I also look at like what PD that we support our participants in whatever word we want to use. I use practitioners,
Mhm.
participants, but it's not always about what strategies to use. And it's so fascinating because, like you said, having multiple strategies at hand just supports that process and getting to those higher levels of thinking and higher
Mhm.
goal setting and higher moving on, just beyond that,
Yes.
beyond tests. And that's wow. Yeah. I'm just kind of ruminating on that.
Mm.
So, Patty, you have so much to give as this experienced traveling educator. Where can people find you? Where can people tap
Mm.
in to what you can give?
The best place to go is my website, which is pattymcgee.org. Patty with a Y. And that's very important because if you look up Patty with an I, Patty McGee, that is a skateboarder from the 1960s. Quite a talent she was. She could skateboard on her hands. That is definitely not me. So it's Patty with a Y, McGee.org.
Awesome, and we
Excellent.
will put that link on the website too when we post this
Thank you.
episode.
Yeah, I had to look up Patty with an I, McGee, and yeah, there's a wow. With like that kind of I know I'm getting this wrong, but almost like a high up wrap, almost beehive hairdo,
Yeah.
skateboarding on her hands. Really impressive. Maybe not nearly as
Oh,
helpful for your PD needs for our audience, but fun to see.
yes, I have a picture book actually that was written about her. That's why I'm looking the other way here. But it's Here Comes Patty McGee, and it's her. It's an illustration of her on her hands on a standing on her hands on a skateboard. Yeah,
Yeah, that's fun.
yeah.
I would
Wish
say look
wish
it
I
up.
could do it.
Super
That's a
fun.
talent. Yeah, absolutely. but not quite what our audience is looking for maybe, but I guess if you need a distraction,
Look up both
before it
of us.
gets yeah, yeah, 2 windows open,
Yeah.
both patties. Um, hey, thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, sharing this kind of expertise. It's so vital, and we just really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely.
My complete pleasure. Thank you for having me
Yeah,
on. And also, it was just fun. You crack me up sometimes.
I mean, I get yeah, that's kind of I guess it's just happens naturally, I don't know. I oh, you know what? Do you wanna plug your books? You wrote
Oh,
some great
sure.
books. Go ahead.
Yes, please do.
Absolutely. So, my most recent book is called Not Your Granny's Grammar, an innovative approach to meaningful and engaging grammar instruction. And it is a book for anyone who is teaching grammar to anyone that is 7 years or older. And it is chock full of those manipulatives that I was mentioning earlier. My co-author, Tim Donahue, this might be a favorite part for many people. A lot of us feel uncomfortable teaching grammar because we don't know it well ourselves. So Tim Donahue created a grammar refresher, which is about a third of the book. And it's just brilliant. It explains grammar in ways that helps us to understand and remember. And he actually went ahead, got a dry erase board for his basement and had his sons, he has 3 of them, help out by videotaping lessons that Tim taught about different, more complex concepts of grammar. So that's our book, Not Your Granny's Grammar.
Wow, that's cute. I like that. So, that's your latest?
Yes.
Okay. And I see it on your bookshelf. Our audience is not gonna see this because it's an audio podcast.
Yeah.
Smart.
I know,
But
and they're not gonna see your color-coded bookshelf,
No.
these major, which I
no, this is
love.
what you
I
guys are
just
missing.
love that.
Yeah. Thank
But
you.
yeah, but again, Patty, thank you for your time, your space, and just giving a little bit for our audience to support in their growth and their instruction.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Don't forget about My Adult Ed Story, a continuous project that highlights the lived experiences and origin stories of adult education and literacy practitioners. Each story is unique, and the more we learn about each other, the stronger our network becomes. Please consider sharing your written or audio recorded story with us. A link to the My Adult Ed Story page, as well as submission instructions, are included in this episode's description. We look forward to growing this collection.
Connect with Adult Ed, the NMEA podcast, is a project of the Propel Professional Learning System and is funded by the New Mexico Higher Education Department's Adult Education Division. Thank you for listening.